Anomalies.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. This is a program about things seen out of the corner of one's eye, about shadows and what lurks in those shadows. This is a program about the unexplained and the unexplainable.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. Dan Hall here with my broadcast buddy Dave Jinks. Dave, how are you? Are you here in Olympia, or are you out to Seabrook?
I am in Olympia with you, so we're staying local for this one for sure.
Okay. You and I in the past have had discussions about our parents, both of whom, well, at least your mom is still alive, but you lost your dad when you were a pretty young guy, and both of my parents are gone now, and I think we've had discussions about, wouldn't it be great to have contact with them? You remember some of those discussions?
Oh yeah. I look for that contact to happen in dreams. Actually, that's something I like to ask our guest about. One of the many things I'd like to ask her about. So that's a way to start it off for sure. But why don't you introduce Joanne for our audience?
Well, we're fortunate to have Joanne Clarkson coming to us from the vicinity of Port Townsend. And I was trying to think when I first met you. Several years back, I had a kind of a short-lived ghost tour of Olympia, and you were actually part of that. If I remember, you hung out in the Druid's Nook in downtown Olympia, and we're part of that. And so, but I'm sure I met you and James, your husband, before that time. So we go back a ways, I guess.
Yes. I think you first met my husband, Jim, who studies UFOs. There was a group in Tumwater that met at an apartment complex. I think maybe we met you through those people originally.
Yeah, because James used to be MUFON state director, didn't he?
Yep, he did.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, we could talk about UFOs, but I think there are more interesting things to talk about.
You can talk about that another time.
Yeah, we do that. And we have a lot of guests that talk about UFOs. In some of the promotional material you sent, you talked about your experience as a young girl, and that some of those experiences kind of told you in no uncertain terms that you had some special gifts. So do you want to kind of start this off by talking about the first time in your life that you recognized that you might have a special difference that you could use in your life? You want to start there?
Let's start there. Actually, when I was a little girl, I didn't know that everybody couldn't see dead people and tell fortunes and things like that. I think a lot of children are like that. In fact, I think many of us are very open to other worlds, things beyond the veil when we're young, and we just become super logical and super busy as we grow older and just kind of give it away. I was fortunate in that my maternal grandmother was a psychic medium. She told fortunes with cards, and everybody in the my grandmother and her three sisters immigrated from Sweden when they were teenagers back in the early 1900s, and they thought they would find rich, handsome husbands and make this wonderful life in America. And of course, that didn't really turn out. They were taking in laundry in a boarding house like all the other immigrants back then. But Aunt Ruth, their father had been a spiritualist. He had talked to dead people. And Aunt Ruth met some gypsies in the alley behind their boarding house who taught her to tell regular playing cards. And she taught her sisters. And my grandma was really good at it. And eventually Aunt Ruth bought a little millinery shop down by Green Lake, and Grandma told fortunes in the back of the millinery shop. But when I was young, on holidays and family get-togethers, everybody would have their fortune told or tell each other's fortunes. And I didn't know that all families didn't sit around telling each other's fortunes. But I liked it. I really took to it when I was very young, and I learned how to do it. So when I was a very young child, 7 or 8 even, I could tell fortunes with cards. And we'll get into what it means to tell fortunes with cards. How can a piece of paper tell you what's going to happen to you, and that's another thing we can talk about. But anyway, then when I was 10 years old, my father died of cancer. Like you were talking about, Dave lost his father young too. And it was of course, it was a traumatic experience, but we were very involved in our Catholic faith back then. And we had a great deal of support around this. And of course, dying of cancer, you get a little, it isn't like dying in a car accident, which happened to my grandfather later. But so we had time to say goodbye. And so I kind of saw his spirit transition when I was 10 years old. And then for a long time, months after his death, he would come to me and say goodnight. And I did not consider this scary or weird or anything. It just was how it was. And I was very fortunate. I've heard other people, that are psychic mediums or have experiences, have their family tell them not to talk about it. But in my family, everybody talked about stuff like that, so it wasn't a problem. As I got older, like a teenager, I continued to tell fortunes. It was a really fun thing to do at parties. It was more almost like a trick or a game than an actual, talking to ghosts. But I decided I wanted something to do that nobody else in the family had. So I went to the public library and checked out every book I could find on palmistry. And I don't even remember why I picked palmistry, but I did. And I got very good at reading palms. Palms are different than cards in that you can read someone's hand and you learn their tendencies and talents. You can read their history and compare the hands. And from that, you can kind of tell where they're going in their life or maybe where they should go. You certainly can unearth talents and reinforce things for people. And often that's very gratifying. I've now taken to when I read a poem, I usually try to find one thing. It's very visual, and you're always going to have your hands with you, right? Yes. So if I can point out something like, this thing in your hands means that you really are a gifted musician, or this marking on your hand means that you really, really have incredible intuition, or this shows that you really are born to be a leader, or whatever it is that I see in people's hands, and I can show them. Sometimes I draw it with a pen on there so they can see it. And then whenever they're having a bad day or something, or their self-esteem kind of flags, they can look at their hand and say, I was born to be an artist, or I was born to be a teacher, or whatever it is. I usually, when I tell fortunes now, I couple that usually with the tarot, because the tarot tells us specifically sometimes what's going on in people's lives. And so they're a good match. I enjoy doing both of them. But anyway, so I should tell you the story of my life. So as a teenager, I still continued to do poems and cards and various things. And of course, then you grow up, and I got married, and I had a career, and I had children and all that. And my son was born with a very strange marking on both of his hands, and it was not a good marking. And it really freaked me out and scared me. So for a few years there, I didn't do that at all. But he ended up being just a very delightful, bright little boy, and he still is a very successful man and a good human being. So I found other ways to interpret what I saw in his hand, which made me feel better. And sometimes I feel more called to this, and sometimes less so. And sometimes I do experience spirits who have passed. I think because, I should say too, my sister died before I was born. And her spirit was always within the family too. And so I was very adept at contacting the dead people in my own family. And so sometimes I would see dead people in general or dead people for others. Since I had a pretty conventional career, I was a librarian for 20 years, and then I became a nurse, which is what I really wanted to do all my life, and I was a hospice nurse. And that's when I really had some incredible experiences, I'll tell you.
I bet.
But anyway, so now that we're retired, I can pretty much do my psychic work as much as I want, full time. I don't want to work full time, but I have more flexibility about reading fortunes, or I've been concentrating a whole lot on my mediumship, maybe talking to people who have passed, and sometimes they have messages for other people, and I'm much more confident about that than I used to be. Part of the trick is, most people think of clairvoyance And I'm pretty much a clairaudient. So most people expect when you see a ghost, you're going to see the person, like I'm looking at you on Zoom, or you see somebody on TV or even in the room. And I never, how should I say, I rarely see people that clearly. I usually see an aspect of people, like if you have the best friend and you're walking down the street and you look farther down the block and you see someone walking even from the back and you know it's them just because of how they walk or whatever, you just know. That's more how I see spirits. And then they often tell me stuff. I hear phrases, I hear names, or I hear things. And I'm more likely actually to do that sometimes, even in dreams, and we can talk about dreams. Although I've been trying to develop my clairvoyance. And just yesterday, I told someone's fortune, and a spirit came through that showed me his hands. I thought that was really funny because I had read her palm, which was a really interesting palm, and she had a question about some things, and I thought there was a spirit that had some input. And so when the spirit came through, he showed me his hands, not so much to read them, but to prove who he was. He was a very hard worker, and he had these calluses all over his hands, and these very square, hard-working hands, which indeed she corroborated were the hands of this person that she was kind of hoping to contact. So I could go on and on, but why don't you ask me some questions? Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. My questions have already started to formulate in my head. So I'm thinking about the differences between palmistry, tarot, and your spirit communications. So would you say that tarot and palmistry are skills that anybody could learn without having to be psychic, or are they different?
Well, I think everybody is psychic, some more than others, or people develop their knowingness in different ways. There's this big trend now toward mindfulness. They even teach mindfulness classes in high school, which means just kind of being really aware of your surroundings and other people. And that's kind of the first step in becoming an intuitive or a psychic. Now, that having been said, some people are much better at it than others. How should I say?
Because you said you went to the library and checked out a book on palmistry. That's what triggered this question.
Yeah, a whole bunch of them. And yes, I used to, down at Dan's Druid's Nook in Olympia too, we used to teach tarot classes on the premise that anyone could learn, could use tarot cards and could get something out of it. And I stand by that. If you really make the intention that you want wisdom and enlightenment and are willing to accept what the universe tells you, the universe will talk to you. The universe is out there and talk to anybody. It talks to everybody all the time. Some people are just more attuned to it or more comfortable with it. You know, it's funny. A lot of people are scared to death. It's kind of a lack of self-confidence. I still have one cousin who is extremely successful, very wealthy, and she has never let me read her palms or her cards. In fact, when we were at family gatherings, Pam will put her little hands into fists so I can't see what's in there, which is very silly because, like I said, she's a very talented person. And I'm sure she has lovely palms, and I've glanced at them, but she didn't know I was looking from time to time. But she's just fearful, I guess. I never tell negative fortunes, and that isn't never with a positive, with a big N. If there is something that comes through, it's not like, oh my God, you're a horrible person. It's like, I can tell you're really unhappy right now. The universe wants you to know that you're not quite on your path, and that's because you're not doing what you really are called to do and where your talents lie. I say stuff like that. Or I can say, my gosh, I know you've gone through some just heartbreaking things recently, and the universe is really sad. And, we sympathize with you. This is a learning thing, and, how do you get through this and how can you grow? And we talk about that as we lay down cards or look into the palm. I have friends who are psychic mediums who don't use anything. They just sit there with a person and look into their eyes or hold their hand, or sometimes hold something of theirs like a piece of jewelry or something. I can do that too, but I'm much more comfortable using a medium, a tool like the cards, because, how should I say, if I just tell somebody something, they might agree or disagree, but as we all know, when we learn or experience, you have to experience it yourself. You have to see it yourself, or it's not going to work for you or come through. So if we use something like tarot cards and we lay out the pattern, I mean, it's obvious when you get a bad card. If there's a swan there with a sword sticking out of its chest, you know this is not a good day. Or if you see two lovers, you know that it's something very positive, you know. So they can look at the cards with me, and I know the ancient meanings of the cards and how I've interpreted the cards, but I always invite my client to look with me. That's one reason I like to do Zoom or FaceTime, or barring that, I take a picture of the cards and send it to their cell phone, or I can describe it. I've told fortunes over the phone for years, the cell phone with the pictures, but if the client can see it too, and this one lady came to me and wanted to know something about her brother, and we did the whole fortune, and it just really wasn't coming through for me. I thought he was fine, but I couldn't really tell her why, and I could tell just my saying, I think he's fine, wasn't doing it for her until finally she looked down and she said, green shoes, look, that card, the person in the card has green shoes. And I said, yes, those are green shoes. And that totally answered her question for her. I don't remember exactly. I don't think she even told me the whole significance of the green shoes, but that totally validated the fact that he was fine. He was doing what he was supposed to. It might be strange, but it was, you know. And so there are these little, I guess everybody needs their aha moment in the fortune, and I can't really give it to them unless they see it too.
Well, let me jump in here and ask a question, because I'm writing down a bunch, and we run the risk of not getting through the 2-3 dozen questions that we have here, because you just keep adding to my list with these interesting aspects of what you do and your special talent. And I consider myself, out of the two of us, Dan and I, to be the resident skeptic, which isn't saying a whole lot considering the topics that we routinely and joyously discuss here. But I suspect that we have some in the audience who are saying, well, hold on a minute. We're talking about palms. We're talking about cards. It's random. You can find what you want to see, et cetera, et cetera. Why would lines in your hand indicate any specific direction in life? Stuff like that. And my question to you is, the subjectivity of it potentially could be a confirmation that it does work, because it allows you to channel what you're tapping into. My view is that it's not necessarily how long the line is in your hand or the green shoes on the guy in the card. It's you pulling information in and making a connection that is real. You can call it coincidence, but maybe synchronicity is a better term for it. So, how do you explain that when people who are skeptical talk about, well, it's just randomness, you're just finding, something in the noise that you can, how do you deal with that argument against, what you do?
Well, you're right. You're right about that. And that it is, let me explain. And this is the most important thing my grandmother taught me, or if you listen to famous psychics program like James Van Praagh or Sylvia Brown or John Holland or these people, what you have to really, 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 really be a good medium. In fact, you can't be a medium without it. The main thing you have to do is get yourself totally, totally, totally out of the way. There can be no Joanne ego. In fact, Joanne really steps aside. When I sit in my mediumship power, I always start with a blessing of some kind over our session. And then I ask that a spirit or guide, whoever wants to speak with us, will come through and tell us what we need to know. And we know that all communication received will only be for the highest good of all concerned. We always say that and say thank you. And so even when I mean, there's multiple interpretations to every tarot. Palms are a little more specific. It isn't necessarily the length of the line. But I can always tell people, and I read mostly strangers. I read down at Phoenix Rising down here. I read people, people that I know. In fact, it's almost harder sometimes to read people that you know, because I'm expecting something to look a certain way. Yeah. But I can tell people, I think you're blah, 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 because this is what this line means. And this is what, the same with the cards. Okay. So how should I say? I say when I see the cards or the palm, or just get messages or see a ghost over someone's shoulder, whatever it is. I say what comes. Luckily, I'm a very spontaneous person. That helps because I get a message and it usually comes really, really fast. Luckily, I talk really fast, and I over the years I've developed that skill to the point where if I start saying something that Joanne the normal person, Joanne the nurse, Joanne the mother, Joanne the wife, or whatever would say, I literally get flicked, like you flick with your, finger and your thumb. Like I used to flick my kids when they were acting up and something that I didn't want to yell at them. I literally can feel that sensation in my usually in my upper right arm. And I know that I've gotten off track and I need to go back. That was a judgment that Joanne made, not what the universe wanted this person to hear. And so I say what the universe needs them to hear.
And that's key, too.
That is
because
huge.
Ego
if the minute
present,
ego gets in there, the whole thing is blown.
Is present in everyone, and that I would guess is what blocks most of us from being able to make that, complete that channel to tap into that universal mind and the universe, for just a general term.
Yes,
and that's hard to do for.
Oh, it's really hard
most of us. But you've developed it over many decades, and I thought it was very interesting. You told the anecdote about your friend who held her fists tight because she didn't want you to see the lines in her palms. And that's kind of to me is a symbol of how most of us live. She didn't want to know the future. If you're feeling good and you're having a good career and you're worried, am I going to die in a plane wreck, next? I don't want to know that. Not that you can tell something that specific, probably, but from a
would
palm
never
reading,
say that.
you would never, yeah. But it's just that reaction that she had is very interesting to me, because we're frightened to tap into that bigger universe, that bigger mind. I think a lot of us, which of course puts barriers to making that communication with that also.
Yes.
So I have questions about when you worked as a hospice nurse, for sure. But I was going to give Dan a chance to jump in with something if he's got, before we kind of leave this topic.
Dave, you're doing a hell of a job. Why should I screw you up there?
Well, can I'll lead off with one good story
Yeah.
about hospice, because another thing I was thinking of, how should I say? Because there are certain people that do mediumship well. And I do reinforce this by meditation. And I've worked hard on this. It isn't that this like a bolt of lightning struck me and I can do it. Like I still read all the new books on tarot and palmistry that come out and psychic stuff. And I listen to podcasts and I meditate a lot, because you got to keep it going and keep yourself in tune, I guess, like anything. But okay. So sometimes a spirit finds you. And I heard James Van Praagh say this in a lecture a little while ago. Sometimes there are spirits just floating around and they need to come through. They're trying to come through to their relatives, and the relatives for some reason can't receive it. So they wait for somebody that can deliver the message. Here's a really good story. Okay, so I first started working hospice when we lived in Aberdeen, and I worked for Harbor's Home Health and Hospice. And one night I was just about, we had computers, but they were just kind of new. The fact that everybody had this, maybe in early 2000s. Okay, so I was just leaving. It was 5 o'clock. I was the last nurse that had come back in for the day, and the lady who answered the phone said, I hate to ask you this, but I think it's sort of on your way home. We've just admitted this lady to hospice today. Her family has a bunch of questions about her medications, and I can't really answer them over the phone. Would you mind stopping by on your way home? You can come in late tomorrow. I said, well, that's fine. And so she printed out, she said, the lady isn't in the computer yet. We haven't been able to put her in yet, but I printed out what we have. So here's a printout. She lived in this kind of 55 and older residential place. So it's like November, it's raining really hard and it's dark. And I've been to this place before, but it's big. It's over kind of on South Side. And so I went down the streets looking, and finally I find the house number that Garnet had given me. And I get out of the car and I knock on the door, and the lady's name was Virginia. So this kind of older man and this younger woman answer the door. And I say, hi, I'm Joanne, the hospice nurse. I've come, I couldn't decide whether to say wife or mother. I've come for Virginia. And they just stand there and stare at me. And I said, is your mother on hospice? Her name is Virginia. And she said, well, they said, she said, my mother's name is Virginia, but she died on hospice. Well, she said, why don't you come in? And so I walk into their house, and they have this table set up with candles and pictures of this lady and all this stuff. And she had died a year ago on that day.
Oh.
And I said, wow. And I said, well, did you just call Harbor's Home Health and Hospice about a medication question? And they said, no, you guys helped us, but that was a year ago. And she hadn't been my patient. I hadn't seen her. And so they said, and we were sitting here, we've been trying all day. We've been trying to contact her. And so all these stories make me cry. They're very emotional. They said, and we believe that you are the answer to our, and the paperwork was this lady's name, Virginia. But when I looked at the paperwork, Garnet had given me the slip of paper with the address. But when I looked at the printout paperwork, it was another lady named Virginia, a street over. So I sat with these people a little bit, and they told me about their mother. It was very nice. And they said, you're the answer. You're the communication. So I left. I went and found the other Virginia and got her medication straightened out and went home. But I felt like that was truly when I was used by spirit, because it is hard. I don't know what they didn't know what they were expecting. The lightning would strike the house, that they would see her ghost, or, they were just looking for any kind of a sign. And so I got to be the sign, and I thought that was very cool.
That's a great story.
Yeah. You were used.
I was used.
You were used by the universe, but
yes.
in a good way.
In a good way, yeah.
Maybe that can be said for all of us. We're all being used, or we're using each other, or using ourselves, or whatever. But I just thought I really wanted to bring up an experience that happened to me and get your opinion on it.
Yeah, I love that.
Because I haven't had a lot of experiences that I call supernatural or paranormal or whatever. I feel like Dan and I are always talking about, why don't we see UFOs? Why don't we meet Bigfoot? Stuff like that.
And Jim says that too. Yeah.
And then the follow-up question is, do you really want to meet Bigfoot, in the dark forest? And we usually end up hedging our, answer. It's kind of like, well, we'll see what happens when it happens. But I did have, as Dan mentioned, my father died in 1996, so I was about 27. I wasn't young, but that was about when I was building a bond with him as a man. He and I were talking about ventures potentially that we could go into, because he was kind of a geek like me. He was into computers and stuff, and he was real excited about potentially starting this. He was in pharmacy at Washington State University, and he wanted to develop a program for pharmacists' use, and he was all excited about this. And he died shortly thereafter, which was just, of course, sad for all sorts of reasons. But for me, because I was kind of excited about what he was excited about. But anyway, that's been a long time. But I have never, very rarely have I had dreams about him, and I've always wondered why. Over the past 25 years, why does he not make contact with me? Logically, it would be in a dream, at least in my mind, and I have had dreams about him periodically over the years, but every time, except once, and I'll get to that, but every time up to that, he was like a zombie, is the only way I can describe him. He was just a shell of himself. In real life, he was kind of dorky and made corny jokes, and, he's a very serious, straight-laced businessman and doctor of pharmacy, but he had that streak of being a kind of goofball, and we all kind of, relished it when that goofball came out in him on rare occasions. We're like, oh, Dad's being silly or whatever. But in the dreams, he's always been empty, zombie-like he's been lobotomized or something. And the relations I have with him in the dream, he's always like that. Well, until I think it was last year, I had a dream, and here comes Dad in my dream, and we were walking up a staircase or something. He came down, I think, and he said, Dave, and he was all excited. I mean, just like eyes lit up and just full of life. And he said, today's the day. And then the dream kind of ended, nothing much. So I woke up and I was like, today's the day. What does that mean? Well, it turns out I learned the next day that my soccer coach, my longtime soccer coach, soccer is a passion of mine. I played it for over 40 years. He was my first real coach, very much a mentor, just a good guy. He was my first coach. He was like a second dad, really, is how I thought of him. Well, it turned out that he passed away at precisely the time I had that dream. I think it was like 3 a.m. somewhere. And I learned later, within that window, Phil was my soccer coach, had passed away. And that was when my dad came to me and said, today's the day. And my interpretation was that he was excited to have someone, who was a good friend, because he was good friends with Phil. They both worked at the university. And he was excited, and he wanted to let me know that he was excited about that event. And I was so moved by it that I wrote a letter to the family, and I said, hey, my condolences. Phil was like a second father to me in a lot of ways. And I had this dream, so I was compelled to share that. But anyway, my question, I guess, to you is just your impression of that little anecdote, and maybe a theory about why dead people or significant people show up in dreams or don't show up in dreams, and how you interpret that sort of anecdote, I guess.
Very good story.
Mm-hmm.
I'll answer the first part about why people do or don't appear. And you're right, dreams are a great way for the other side to come to us. I think sometimes it takes a while for spirits to settle on the other side. In fact, spirits have told me that, what did he die of, your dad?
Well, that's the other thing. He was very young. In fact, he's the age I am right now. He was 52. Okay. Well, I'll be 52 in a week.
Okay.
So he died suddenly. One day he was the racquetball champion at the college, and then he died at his desk of a mitral valve prolapse.
Wow.
Basically, electrical malfunction, not really a heart attack technically, I guess, but it was a malfunction. That was it. My mom came home that Friday night and found him dead at the desk, which must have been horrific. It was when I was in Seattle, or Olympia, actually.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was still in Seattle. But anyway, so yes, it was very sudden. And that was the other, who was the other guest that we talked to, Dan? That was their model too, was that maybe my father is sort of in an intermediary place. Maybe he needed help being escorted all the way through. And maybe Phil was potentially a guy who could be with them, that sort of thing. That makes sense to me. But anyway, what more do you feel about it?
And also, well, I'll interject something personal here. My mom and I were very close all our lives, because there were just the two of us for a long time after my dad died. And then we just always were close. I took care of her for a long time before she died. And we talked every day, like pretty much all my life. My mother was she is an Aries, and I'm an Aquarius. My mother she also taught 5th grade for like 40 years, and she liked it. She was a very, 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 very strong person. My mother had always she kind of did always know she was right. She was right a lot of the time. She had very strong opinions, and I don't think, she did not appear ever to harbor self-doubt. And I was a much less assertive person, especially when I was younger. And I felt like when I was very young, I made almost all my decisions based on what I thought my mother wanted, or what would, anyway, the entire story of my life. So on and on. So when my mother finally passed, I think the point of this was, my mother didn't talk to me for 20 years after she died either. And I think it was because it took her a long time to die, so the transition wasn't the problem. In fact, I actually saw her spirit pass and people come to get her. That's another story. But I think she knew that I just simply needed time to have my totally own life. And like you said, your dad and you were really close, and it was wonderful. And I love my mother dearly. She was always I'm a writer too. She was always my first reader. I valued her opinions. I respected her. But even if I made mistakes, I kind of needed to do my life without her telling me what to do. So it's really only in the past year or two I have heard significantly from my mother again. And I think we both just needed a break. And maybe that's true of your father too. He needed time to get himself settled in the other world, that's for sure. But maybe he thought, son, I mean, you already know what your father would think. He already gave you a lot of wisdom. You don't need him to constantly be repeating it or to come in dreams and tell you what to do. Or not that you don't miss him and might like his company, but maybe he needed you to make other relationships too. So I don't know. It is hard to know. And also, how should I say, sometimes we expect people to come in certain ways, like my grandmother that wasn't psychic. When I know she's around, I always smell gingerbread. My grandma made the most wonderful gingerbread. And when she comes to me, I don't see her, I don't hear her. I simply smell gingerbread, and I know that she's there. So sometimes our spirits come to us in ways. When Jim's dad was a great one for aphorisms and little sayings. Kurt was just, and so every once in a while we're somewhere and we hear somebody say something, we say, there's Kurt, there's Kurt. Because it's this weird little thing that Kurt always used to say. So our loved ones have a whole bunch of ways of coming through, and sometimes we don't always recognize it, or we think, the neighbor must be cooking gingerbread. Yeah. So,
Right. In the grand scheme of things, I trust that things are how they should be. But, you have that, sometimes I have that sort of resentment. He left so early. He left my mom. They were married 29 years, 39, I can't remember, 20.
Long time.
A long time. And they had a good relationship. And, she's kind of struggled since then. And, it was really just abrupt. And so I feel like, well, why can't he just check in and say, okay, son, you're doing all right, whatever. But I get what you're saying in that he's confident that I'm doing what I need to be doing. I don't need special guidance or whatever. But you feel like that checking in part is missing, at least for me. But anyway,
don't you
your
sometimes
interpretation.
In your head know what he would say? You're making a decision. I still do that with our mama a little bit.
Yeah.
Think, what would my dad have done? And then you just kind of know.
Yeah, that's true. I do. I know what he'd tell me anyway, so it's not like I really need him to come tell me. It's just more of an encouragement thing, like, yes, you're doing the right thing. That is what I would do. That's what I recommend. And maybe you're right. Maybe it will come later. Maybe I don't need it right now, even if I feel like I need it sometime. But anyway, a lot of people go through that, and a lot of people
then
want a guide of some kind.
Well, and then one always expects the dead to bring really important messages like the meaning of life. Okay, when my mom appeared to me very vividly, I had gone to a store that was going out of business, and I thought I didn't really need a lot of clothes, but they had a bunch of T-shirts, and you can always use T-shirts, right? So, you couldn't take stuff back. So I thought, well, I'd probably better go try them. This was before COVID, obviously. So I always wear blue. Blue is my favorite color. I always do blue. So I got a stack of T-shirts, and I went into the fitting room and tried them on. I'm all by myself, and there wasn't even anybody in the fitting rooms next to me. I tried on these T-shirts, and so I decided I'm going to buy a turquoise one and navy blue one. Okay, big and loud, just like she's in the room. My mother says to me, "Oh, for heaven's sakes, buy the red one." Not the meaning, and so I did. It's been a good shirt. But it just like, oh, for heaven's sake, you want me to do things the same way.
And that was the message from the other side, was
that's right, by the red
wardrobe accessorizing advice, which is kind of funny, actually. Maybe it's very funny. Maybe the lesson is that we shouldn't take ourselves so seriously while we're here. Maybe
the spirits so seriously. Just because they're dead doesn't mean they have all the wisdom in the universe. They may have.
Well, now, as somebody who used to do ghost investigations, that brings up an interesting question to me. And I've asked other ghost investigators this other question, and on one level, the answer seems, yeah, that's what the answer is. But on another level, it's like they're missing something. So what is the afterlife like? What would be your interaction with spirits? And I'm not the kind of guy who believes in heaven or hell. I think those are human constructs. So what is the afterlife like?
I think it's pure spirit. Obviously, we've left the body. That's very obvious. Anyone that's ever seen a dead body knows when somebody's dead. Right. The spirit is more. The spirit is a little harder to see, and since we're both, it's harder. So where do spirits go? They go. I think they go into a place of great freedom. We can get into the whole thing about reincarnation too, and we probably do come back somehow or other. We've been into past lives recently. It's kind of fun. But anyway, but I will tell you another story, okay, about a hospice patient. This is a good story, okay? I had this guy, comes on hospice when he's 98 years old, supposedly dying of lung cancer, okay? He's a delightful man, lived in Olympia. He's been a doctor all his life, traveled the world, started public health in Washington State during World War II, also started public health in both India and Israel. Okay, so he's 98, still lives in his own house by himself. There's this college kid from Evergreen that lives in this little cottage on the property that checks on him, but he pretty much lives by himself. So we go through hospice, and this guy is not particularly sick. He's never short of breath. His vital signs are good. He's completely alert and oriented. So after a year, they'd found this tumor on his lung by accident after a fall. And so when he's not declined at all, when he's 99, they x-ray him again. The tumor hasn't changed. They decided he's not really dying of lung cancer. They kick him off hospice, okay? So, but he was and he wrote poetry. He and I both wrote poetry, and I just loved this man. And so he didn't live too far from us, so I continued to visit him about once a week, even when I wasn't his hospice. And the student was an interesting kid too, and we'd all talk together, and of course, just didn't understand why he wasn't dead. He died finally when he was 101, very peacefully one day. But he was, why aren't I dead? You know, his daughter was dead, his wife was dead, all his friends were dead, everyone he ever knew was dead. You know, and he was all ready to go.
Why can't I die?
Yes, why aren't I dead? And so I told him one thing, you had to meet me. You had to meet me. But he talked all the time about what it was like, what it would be like when his spirit left his body. And at one point, after he had turned 101, he told us one day that he felt like he was outside of time. And we said, what? And he said, no, I think I'm about ready to go. I think I'm outside of time. I'll prove it. We said, okay. He says, I'll tell you what the score of the Mariners game is going to be tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
And he did, and he was right.
Holy
so it had these flashes. And so we talked, and he said, I'm going to be pure spirit. One day, my spirit will walk out of my body, and I will walk into pure beauty just in the universe. Okay, so he died. He dies very peacefully. When the bath, that we got this guy to come in and help him with the shower, he died right after a shower, very peacefully one day. And when I came back and saw the body, he was gone. There was no spirit in that house. It was his body. He was gone. So he's gone. But I thought of him, okay, so, but the son lived in Seattle, actually. And the property was quite valuable. It was beautiful. It had a view of Eld Inlet and the Cascades of Mount Rainier. $1 million property. So the son was trying to decide what to do with it. So he asked the college kid to stay on there until, kind of just caretake the place. Okay, so that kid also worked part-time at the library. So I'm down there at the library the following June. He died in October, and there the following June. And he says to me, they're going to sell the house now. I have to move. And so I thought about it, and I called him the next day and said, would you mind if I just came and sat in that house one more time? And he was going through a bad patch with a girlfriend. He said, yeah, as long as you don't bring those damn cards of yours, I don't want to know what's going to happen to me. I said, well, you don't even have to go in. Just let me in the house. I just want to see if I feel anything. So he said, okay. He says, well, it's Wednesday. You can come at 3. I have to be gone by 5. I said, okay. So I went there on a Wednesday, and it was in June. So it's, it was a long time till sunset and stuff. So I go in the house. He decides he'll go in with me. It's just like it always was. We sit in our places where we left Jess's chair, and we sat there, and we both felt these just extreme peace, really, really fulfilling. It's a beautiful day, a few clouds, but a very nice day. And I did tell both of our fortunes. We both had good fortunes. We felt like wisdom. It's approaching 5 o'clock, and I look out there, and we're facing east, okay, and the sky starts turning pink. And I said, well, it's hours till sundown. This can't be sunset. And so Devin says, what is it? I said, I don't know, but the sky is pink. It looks like either the whole Cascade Range is on fire or there's something weird. And we watched. And over the mountains, it wasn't exactly a rainbow because it wasn't bowed. It was like the entire spectrum just rose up and manifested, like every color of the rainbow. And we're just sitting there, both of us are sobbing, because it's exactly what Jess had told us. It was like the most beautiful, pure energy you ever could imagine.
Mm.
And it stayed for a long time. Devin did have an appointment at 5, so we finally had to leave. So we left, and I drove as far as I could. Then I found another beach access so I could go down and look. And I drove down again, and I looked, and the for a better word, rainbow, although like I said, had floated up into the air a little bit, and it was going kind of toward my left, which would be kind of toward the south, just kind of drifting up there. And I thought, wow. And ever since then, that was in 2010, ever since then, I see rainbows and spectrums, not like a rainbow in the sky. Usually it's like in a puddle or in the bevel of a mirror or just some weird, totally unexpected rainbow, for a better word. And I know that Jess is there. And I always feel this extreme love and comfort. And I thought, wow, that's heaven. Okay, when I go to heaven, I'm going to go into the rainbow too.
Well, that is amazing. And it brings, for me, it is a nice transition into the last area that I wanted to bring up. I'll let Dan, because I've been talking a lot, I'll let Dan get onto his stuff. But I wanted to talk about the so-called veridical near-death experience. That's where researchers appear to be moving pretty quickly. I know there's decades worth of research, talking to nurses such as yourself, your particular experiences, obviously with direct accounts from experiencers who died clinically and then came back. Those are all great avenues of research to pursue, but what the trend is now is to find, again, nurses and doctors who were present when the patient had one of these experiences, and the experience, for lack of a better word, bled into their consciousness, as well as with the family members who were present. Mm-hmm. And they're calling this the veridical, meaning truth, verity, I guess. The root word is just, it's basically a multiple witness experience or account of the near-death experience. So I'm wondering, it sounds to me like you've experienced this firsthand, I'm guessing, but can you speak about that particular experience, but also not just whether it happens, but how subjective still that might be? Because, of course, a skeptic's first question about the story you just told was that, well, why didn't everybody see the rainbow? Why isn't it on YouTube? Just after YouTube became popular, so somebody could have seen it. And why didn't 1 million people take pictures and prove that this rainbow existed? So was that rainbow for just you and the student you were with, the caretaker you were with? Or how do you explain something like that? And so I'm thinking these guys going down this path towards the so-called veridical NDE, they may end up in the same place, not being able to, quote, prove it, because it was still subjective, even though it was shared among multiple witnesses. So again, if you could talk about that a little bit, that's where I'm interested in.
And that's a really good question. Have you guys seen the Fatima movie, Our Lady of Fatima?
No.
Watch that. It's really well done. That's it's true. It's a historical fact.
Mm-hmm.
Was it 1917? These 3 children in Portugal saw 3 apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And huge numbers of people were there, but only the children could actually see the lady, but they saw other things happen. I mean, that's a good movie. It'll help answer that question, too. But anyway, How should I say?
May 13th through October 13th, 1917.
1917, yeah. But Fatima, we called it. I was kind of skeptical. Some of those things are so Hollywood. This was not. It was very well documented and very historical. Fatima. Anyway, watch it. So anyway, how should I say? If other people had seen Jess's rainbow, it just would have been a rainbow or a phenomena in the sky. It was extremely personal to me and Devin. And we both just were shaken to our core. We knew it was Jess. We just knew. And there's some things you just know. And so the people that experience near death, or actually the passing of a person, 201, they pretty much see relatives who have already passed come to get their loved one. Whether they go part of the way and come back, or whether they go all the way, sometimes everybody can see it. I had this one son that had come from Alaska to take care of his dad at the end, who had been kind of the ne'er-do-well of the family, but he was the only one that had time to take care of him then. call me in the morning when we knew his dad was going to pass pretty soon. But he was just freaked out. And I went over to his house and he said, I woke up about 5 o'clock this morning and there was a woman in the room. And I thought it was you. I thought you'd come really early to see my dad. But then I realized you wouldn't come at 5. And how would you even get in? And she went over to the bed and she like kissed my dad. And then she disappeared. And I realized it was my mother. His mother had been dead for about 20 years. It was my mother. And then, and I said, well, she probably is coming to get him. He probably will pass later today. And he did. He passed later that afternoon. But the son actually saw her and thought she was a real person at the time. And other people had said that. And a lot of people that, because sometimes people are on the verge of death for a while. And people say, oh, it's the morphine, or, oh, they're hallucinating because they're sick. No, I really think, because a lot of times they describe people, how should I say, you don't always see dead people when they're old. I mean, you expect to see Granny when she looks like Granny, but maybe she'd really rather have you see her when she was 40 or 20. So sometimes when people describe these loved ones, they describe very specific, like when I've seen my dad, okay, my dad died when I was 10. And I once saw the spirit, and my memory of him, I'm 71 years old, so my memory of him is kind of hazy. We have some photos, but it's kind of, but I knew it was my dad because we had this dog that he adopted for when I was a little girl, this mutt named Money. I could think he paid money at the pound to get her, and I named her Money. It was a black and white dog. That dog loved my father and obeyed him totally. That dog was devastated when he died. And in the vision, there was my dad walking with Money. And so I knew for sure that it was my dad, and I'm sure that dog is in heaven with him.
Oh, yeah.
So people see stuff like family pets, or like you see your dad was a pharmacist, or they see people doing things they loved. My grandfather was a farmer, and whenever I've experienced him, it has something to do with growing things. So people know. And so how should I say, if a whole bunch of people saw a man walking with a black and white dog, it would mean nothing to them. But I knew it was my dad and Money, the dog. And so that's why it's hard to have a universal experience, because experiences are inherently personal.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Although if you did have impartial observers, the doctor, the nurse, who didn't have a history of the patient, and they agreed, well, I saw a man in his 20s walking a dog,
Yeah.
that would be pretty compelling as evidence. If you're needing evidence, I think the three of us here probably don't need it. But it's always nice to hear when you get those moments and you think, wow, okay, there's really no other way to explain that, is there?
Right.
Not in my mind. There are a lot of those accounts too, where it you can't come up with an other explanation, other than what it really appears to be.
Yes. Yeah, no, and let's see, I'm trying to think of anything. Well, there are all sorts of funny little ways for people to let you know. A lot of times, like we were talking about Jim's dad and his little Kurtisms, what he said. Another patient let me know she had died. We went over to visit my son and daughter-in-law in Eastern Washington. I knew she was probably going to pass, but I knew she'd be fine because her family was really good. And she had always had this long, beautiful hair that she could sit on. But after she became quite ill, they had to cut her hair because it was just too hard to maintain. And remember, there was a famous ice skater, Mary Jo Retton, and she had this funny little, maybe you're not.
Very short hair.
But it was a funny little haircut. And after she became a famous ice skater, everybody cut their hair like Mary.
Yeah, it was very short, right?
Yes, yeah. And so when Deb got her haircut like that, she said now she died of ALS, so she was paralyzed at the end. But she said, boy, now I'm an ice skater. That was kind of like everybody's joke. So we went over to my son and daughter-in-law's, and I was hoping that the husband would call me if she passed. But I said I knew she was in good hands, so I felt okay going away. So anyway, so we're sitting in this crowded restaurant waiting for our meal with my son and daughter-in-law and kids, and the food doesn't come, and they have those funny little things on the table that tell you weird facts and stuff, sometimes in restaurants. Okay, so we read the one at our table, and then so we traded with this other table, and because we're still waiting. So finally we traded with this third table, and on the cover of this was the story of Mary Lou Retton, and I knew that my patient had died. And like about 15 minutes later, her husband called me and said she just crossed. But it's like it's little funny things. I mean, everybody in the whole that had read this article about Mary Lou, it meant nothing to them. But I knew that somehow she had put that there so she could tell me I made it and I'm okay with my great hair.
The connections are, it's just much more important to have personal, emotional connections.
Yep.
Showing themselves in the way we live, rather than convincing large groups of people that something they can all agree on, some consensus about whatever.
Yeah. There's really, I don't think people can experience any of this objectively. It has to, that's what I was talking about, people seeing their own fortunes in the cards or in their hand. They have to see it to believe it. It's like the doubting Thomas thing. The apostles could all tell Thomas they'd seen Jesus, and whether you're religious or not, that's a good story. And then old Thomas finally says, well, I won't believe it until I stick my fingers in his wounds. And so there's Jesus, says, okay, Thomas, but it's like, you can have testimony after testimony, but until there's something really personal that happens to you, you really don't get it. And some people are going to deny just because, like Cousin Pam and her fists or whatever, they're just afraid, or I don't know. Since I've never been a denier. I mean, there are certain things that, Jim and I hear some of these stories that people, like the guy, that shot the alien in the woods and wrapped him up in the rug like a burrito. Dan, I don't know if you remember that one a few years ago.
Oh, Jonathan Reed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously, I don't think so, and then, that kind of thing. So everybody has to have some healthy skepticism, because there are people that try to pull off these weird hoaxes all the time. But basically, people's personal stories of things that happen around the death of a loved one, or even years later, are very compelling. And if people sometimes acknowledge it or let them, they have these experiences too.
So I tend to be the timekeeper in these sessions, and we're coming up with about 15 minutes left with you. Now, this is something I think you mentioned in some of your promo stuff, and I don't know if you certainly couldn't do it with Dave. You talked about wanting to do a reading, and Dave would be the perfect person to do this with, but Dave can't hold up his hand. Well, because we can't see his hand.
I'm sitting here thinking exactly the same thing. In fact, I was going to bring that up at the very end here and see how people can contact Joanne and potentially, use her services or ask questions or read her literature, whatever she has, see her website. And I'm convinced that she's genuine because first of all, she doesn't look 71.
No.
She looks about 40.
If she's 71, I'm 170. And I'm only 69, so
41.
Yeah.
That's
you. And my hair is really, I have working in the yard hair too, so because you said it was only going to be audio.
Well, my point was that you have years and decades of experience being an experiencer, but you also have a very technical, respectable background as a nurse. And what else did you?
Librarian.
I was a professional librarian. I have a
librarian for
master's
20
degree
years.
in English and a master's degree in library science. I did that for a long time. I always wanted to be a nurse. I think because my grandfather was in a terrible automobile accident when we had a lot of stuff. We were in the hospital a lot when I was a kid, so I wanted to be a nurse. So I actually went to college on a nursing scholarship out of high school, but I couldn't do it. I got to the floor and I cried every day. So I ended up majoring in English, and I taught for a little while. Then my husband was an English teacher too, and it was just too hard to find jobs for both of us. So I got my library degree, and I was a librarian for 20 years. But after I took care of my mama, we had another, I could tell you profound experiences all night long, but we did have a profound experience when she died. And then afterwards, I told Jim, because we have 5 kids between us, but my youngest had graduated from high school that year. And I told Jim, this is my last chance. I'm going to quit my job and go to school and become a nurse and work in hospice, which I did. So that was very, very rewarding. Those were my happiest working years for sure.
Can we do a reading? Oh, you've got your tarot? Okay.
I got these. We'll do a quick reading for Dave.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There's some.
Will you? No, I'm going to turn off the video. I can't handle it. I don't want to. I'm going to turn. I'm leaving now because you guys finished the interview. No, I'm just, showing the same resistance too.
No, that'll be good.
But I was going to say I would love to do this. So if you're willing to,
we'll do
turn the cards over and see what you see, I'm all for that.
Do you have we'll do a little quick pathway 5-card thing. It's the path you must take, what is sacred, what will help you the most, what's your biggest challenge, and what's the last thing the universe wants you to know. So do you have a specific question, or you just want to know what the universe wants to tell you? I mean, the universe is going to tell you what it wants to tell you anyway. But sometimes if people want to know, should I take a new job? Should I date this girl? Should I buy a new house, buy a new car? I don't know.
I don't have a specific question, and I don't know why I'm the one who's doing this. Now I'm looking at Dan going, Dan could...
I've told Dan's fortune before.
Oh, you have? Okay. Well...
And you're the more, as you self-admitted, you're the more skeptical person, so that's why you should go.
I'm also at some crossroads in my life where, kind of looking to retire early, if at all possible, which brings up a whole host of questions. What do I do with the rest of my life, assuming I hit the average age? I still got 25 years, 30 years left, as a second career. Those kind of general questions. I don't have a specific question, though, no. So let's just see what the universe says.
Okay, so I've been just blessing the cards, and I shuffled them. So with my left hand because it's closest to your heart, that's what my grandma would say, you divide the cards into 3 piles, and you touch one pile without thinking about it, which is hard for a lot of people that are overthinkers. But they have to wait until they just touch one. Okay, so we lay out the 5 cards. This is the Hall and Psychic deck. I really like this deck. It had, rather than, do you know, just real quick, you know how tarot is organized?
I don't.
Or I'll tell it so that makes it easier to understand. Okay. Tarot has 4 suits, kind of like regular playing cards. They're cups, which is love and emotion, swords, which is mental and logical, pentacles, which is like work and business, sometimes physical place, and then wands, which are creativity and spirituality. And if you get one of the minor arcana cards, it kind of tells you what's going on in your life right now. In addition, the tarot has 22 major arcana cards that go from 0 to 21. There are large themes in your life, like the Emperor, which means you're in charge, or death, which can mean a number of different things, or the Tower, which means everything is falling down, or those kind of cards. And that means you need to kind of look at a larger perspective in your life. So sometimes people get all minor ones and sometimes all major ones, and usually it's kind of somewhere in between. I'll write this down. Now, I'll take pictures of them, and I can send them to your cell phone too.
Okay.
Okay, so the first card that represents, now this is a great one for your question. The way that we begin this is the card that represents you, Dave, is 0 of the major arcana. And 0 of the major arcana is the very first card in these large significators. And in the old traditional card is called the Fool Child. In this one, it's called New Beginnings, and that's the way I take it, because 0 is infinite. It really is, like Deepak Chopra calls it, the field of all possibilities. It means that anything is possible for you right now. That's a really big card, okay? Mm-hmm. And kind of the 0, it's always a portal to step through. So whether you retire early per se, I do think that something new is starting in your life, a new venture. And what you should do is not plan too much, just kind of see where things are taking you for a while, see what's going on. And you may be really quite astonished at what you decide you want to do or the doorways that open.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is the little rhyme is the path you must take, sacrifice you must make. But way I take sacrifice is what is really sacred to you. This is interesting. Okay, so what did you get? Another huge significator, number 15. Number 15 in the tarot is the Devil card. And it's...
Of course.
Yes. And when I get the Devil card in a fortune, I always think, Usually I'm either trying too hard or I'm worried about, usually I'm the money worrier, not Jim. I worry about money. We never, no matter what happens, I'm always the one that buys the cheap thing or, that doesn't work. But anyway, so when you get the devil, it doesn't mean there's a devil in your life. It means you're tempted to do something you know you shouldn't do, or you're worried about something you shouldn't worry about. And we all do that. We have, especially starting with that card that says, my God, in your life right now, there are infinite possibilities. You can literally do anything you want right now. And your sensible self is going to say, no, I really can't. I have this obligation and that obligation. I'm really not good at that, so I wouldn't do it anyway. Nope. You need healthy skepticism, and you wouldn't do something totally dangerous, or maybe, but you got to worry not to second guess yourself. Got to not do that.
Okay.
Wow. So what is most helpful right now, we've got the Ace of Pentacles. And the Ace of Pentacles, like I said, has to do with work, sometimes place. But the Ace, of course, is number one. And the word on this card says prosperity begins. And I think right now, like you said, you're in a place where maybe you do have the means to do something a little different. Or else whatever venture you're thinking about is certainly one that's going to serve you well prosperity-wise. And prosperity can mean a lot of things. This card, though, specifically means like money, material things in a good way. Nothing wrong with being rich or having some really good things that you love. And, so right now is a prosperous time. What you're doing is a good thing. So your biggest challenge is 16 major is disruption. You got a lot of, you're really kind of fighting inside yourself about a lot of stuff right now. And so a huge change would be your biggest, and I'm trying to decide whether it's good or bad. Maybe only you know that. 16 major is a big change, a big change. It isn't a little change like you're going to move to another house that's sort of the same. It's like you're going to move to Florida or maybe Paris, or you're going to, do something completely different. And it's your biggest challenge. So maybe a big change is your biggest challenge. That's probably looking at it the other way. Maybe you don't know whether you want to change or not. Maybe that's why I can't figure out maybe that's your big question and big internal conflict is, should I do this really big thing? Should I do a little thing, or should I do nothing at all? I think doing nothing at all would be wrong. That's how how should I say? Tarot cards are never going to tell you you're wrong. They're going to tell you what will happen to you if you stay on one path or another. But certainly radical change is something to consider. Okay?
Okay.
And the last thing the universe wants to tell you is the seven of swords. And the seven swords are mental. I think your mind is your biggest asset and your worst enemy.
Wow, you couldn't have been.
I totally agree. After
Dan
having
on that.
Yeah, after having known Dave as long as I've known him, I totally agree with that.
No, I don't want to give you feedback or input. I'm waiting till you're done.
That's the last card. Okay, in that. And so you need to get your mind, you got a lot going on in your head all the time. You rarely sit around thinking about nothing. I don't think you ever sit around thinking about nothing. So
well, Dan can vouch for that too. It never shuts up. It's not necessarily a good thing, but in my view, but that's right on. In fact, everything you said was perfect. So
well, good.
That's my feedback. And it isn't something you could tell anybody.
No.
Either, because that's very it's very dramatic the way you put it, and I can only agree that is a very accurate depiction of what, at least how I view my life at the moment. So yeah.
It's a very dramatic fortune. It's a very dramatic life. It's much easier, much more exciting for me to tell a dramatic one than kind of a boring. Everything is fine. Your family is fine. Your job is fine. Sometimes people just need affirmation that they're doing. But and you're not doing fine. You're doing how you always do, which is always kind of a lot of plans and thoughts and stuff, and nothing wrong with that. But it's going to intensify a little bit, or maybe a lot.
Well, whoever's listening, I can vouch for Joanne's insight because that's right on for many, many different reasons. But yeah, that's right on for me. So thank you for doing that. I'm interested in hearing Dan's, but I don't know if you.
Well, fortunately, we've run out of time. We won't be hearing Dan's. But I want to vouch for something too, that I think we're very fortunate to have Joanne as a friend. And you're just a dynamite guest. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I think Dave and I have been doing this 11 years, and we've really gotten into the guests lately. But I can only think of one guest who will remain nameless that I haven't enjoyed, and you're right there at the top of the list of those people that we do enjoy. So thank you for being on our show. Maybe we can cajole you into coming back some future date here.
Yeah,
And,
I'd love to come
Yeah,
back.
well, share some of. Do you have some information you'd like to share,
Sure.
with our listeners?
Yeah, I have a website, JoanneThePsychic.com. Joanne has an E on it, Joanne, Joanne the Psychic. Although the Google or whatever has an uncanny way of finding people, even if they names are spelled wrong.
Right.
And then you can also like Joanne the Psychic on Facebook.
Facebook, yeah.
And Joanne Clarkson, I'm there under Joanne Clarkson, which is my regular one, and then Joanne the Psychic is the psychic one. And I do post tarot of the day, so we can also.
Do you post that on Joanne the Psychic? Because I'm connected to your Joanne Clarkson.
Right.
Oh, I should look for that other one.
One of our daughters set up my thing, and I for a while when I started Joanne the Psychic, it would go on both feeds, but it doesn't now unless I specifically put it on Joanne Clarkson. So, but I figure the people that really want to read it go to Joanne the Psychic anyway, and I have few faithful followers. So Joanne the Psychic, and then I'll tell you my email is just JoanneClarkson28@gmail. So.
Okay.
And I really enjoy doing fortunes. And there's all sorts of ways to do them, even in COVID. And then I've been reading now down at Phoenix Rising is a really nice metaphysical store downtown. And we have an upstairs room that's a very large room. We have tables there. We can socially distance. Nobody touches the cards but me, but I can still. So about one weekend a month I read there. So that's
how do you view your role? It seems like you might kind of become a counselor, a de facto counselor when somebody comes in and you do a reading and they say, oh my God, you're, like I was saying, you're right on. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do you draw the line in terms of that sort of advice?
Well, we only ask the universe. And I usually don't read an hour tops. That's about as long as Spirit's going to talk to me without me getting really tired. And so,
yeah.
In fact, I had to cut people off a few times, people that wanted a fortune every week. And I'm not going to tell people. I'll end with one more good story. The universe is not going to solve your problems. You are going to solve your problems. The tarot won't tell you what to do. Once when I was at Dan Mills' Druid's Nook, a guy came in, wanted his fortune told. He wanted to know whether or not he was going to tell a job. And at Druid's Nook, you'd pay Dan and then come back to my little room. So he paid his money, came in, sat down. He said, I want to know if I should take this job. And I said, well, the tarot isn't going to tell you yes or no. We'll lay out a thing and it'll give you different. And he says, no, I paid my money. I want to know yes or no, should I take this job? That's why I came here. And so I tried, again, I explained to him what tarot does, what I do. And he said, you're telling me that I cannot. I said, okay, I'll prove it. I said, I'll prove it. I said, okay, he says, if you want to define it, we could define it. We can say, if we draw like an even numbered card, it's yes, and an odd numbered card, it's no. We could do that. And he says, yeah, I want to do that. I already knew, so I did not touch the cards. He picks up the cards, he shuffles them, and he lays them out, and he draws one card. Can you guess what it was?
0?
Yes, it was one. It was 0. I told him the tarot would do it. He says, oh my God. I said, yeah. I said, and so he let me then tell a fortune, which kind of showed him different avenues. And because there really isn't a right answer. If you take the job, something will happen. If you don't, something else will. And what is best? That's very relative too. The universe, there aren't yes and no answers to life. And the tarot, being very wise, knows that.
So true.
Yes.
It's just different choices, different possibilities.
Yes.
Well, my mind is officially blown, Dan. I'll let you
I think mine got blown in the 60s and I haven't recovered yet. So, Joanne, thanks a lot. Say hello to James.
So you
for
so,
us.
like tell me when it's posted so I can like put it on my Facebook page and stuff.
That would be a Dave question.
Yeah. I mean, I'll certainly
so people
by
can
this
go and
weekend.
listen. You know, my great following of Facebook or whatever. I can tell my relatives that they can go.
Yeah, by this weekend for sure. Hopefully before that.
That's fine.
The next.
Just tell me when and how they can get there and stuff.
But I'll definitely email.
And I'll put a promo on my Facebook page because it's the Anomalies page tonight. So that'll kind of whet people's appetites.
Sounds good.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you. This was so much fun.
Well, we had fun too. I'd like
we do.
have you back sometime and maybe go into, more in depth in your experiences as a nurse. That's where I'm really fascinated, that just the anecdotes you have, because those are very profound, but also unique. You don't hear that many, but you're speaking from a point of real expertise in those cases, which is compelling to me. And some people who may be on the fence about, well, is any of this stuff real? When I hear you tell your accounts of those personal experiences, I'm very compelled to believe you. It's very genuine, and it's it's very scientific too, which is hard to come by in some of these areas. So we'll do that.
Good.
All right. Bye, Joanne.
Bye.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll
Joanne.
talk again.
We will. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.